live on SABC2.
20 years into democracy, what is the state of youth in South Africa?
A lot of inequality that we still need to sort out.
I think we've come a long way. We're not there yet.
I can give you stats of people who have lost their houses in Midvaal.
So give me one name of a person who lost their house in Midvaal because they didn't pay services. Where do you get that statistics from?
Many people are watching you, don't lie here.
You are the one who's lying.
It's hailed as one of the best constitutions in the whole world. February 1997 and the new constitution of the Republic of South Africa was born. The country's charter is recognized as one of the most progressive. The Constitutional Court approved the constitution on 4th December 1996 and signed by President Nelson Mandela in Sharpeville, Gauteng on 10 December the same year. Among the laws contained in the Constitution is the Bill of Rights, which is the cornerstone of democracy in South Africa. It enshrines the rights of all people in South Africa and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality and freedom.
Welcome to this edition of our SA Decide series. Today we are talking about the South African Constitution. As you will agree, the Constitution is the founding document upon which this nation is built. Having said that, it's imperative for us to all know the rights that our Constitution guarantees us. People who spoke to the SA Decides team in Mpumalanga say they understand their rights as enshrined in the Constitution. However, the team met with a man who claims his rights are being rights that our Constitution guarantees us. People who spoke to the SA Decides team in Mpumalanga say they understand their rights as enshrined in the Constitution. However, the team met with a man who claims his rights are being violated. Let's take a look.
The Constitution is the supreme law of South Africa, which sets out the rights and decisions of its citizens. But do the people of South Africa know what the Constitution is and what it entails, and are they protected by the Constitution? Join me on SA Decides as we find out.
Well, the Constitution entails that we don't go back to the past state of our country, and then that everybody is treated equally. Yeah, as it is said on the Freedom Charter, and then it governs the country in a specific way.
Abdul Manyike is one of many South Africans who feels as if his rights are being violated. His workers demanded that he leave this land of which he works upon, and are also posing threats to his life because of unresolved working issues.
Umthetho wesisekelo niyawazi, so ke umthetho wesisekelo sinanindleleni lokuthi
I know the Constitution. Government has stated that we should create our own jobs and we should not depend on white people to get jobs. We should, as a people, find ways of creating job opportunities. We should assist one another in everything we do. The work I am doing is not only benefiting my kids. 10 other community members do benefit from it, and they are able to support their children.
Nabona bakhona kusupporta abantu ababo bafundisa abantu ababo iloko mina nikuyendaka elomsebenzi lo nikuyendaka wona mina.
Joining me in studio is Hendrik Smith from the Democratic Alliance and Tim Fish Hodgson from Section 27. He's a researcher. He belongs to Know Your Constitution campaign. And later we'll be joined by Professor Shadrack Guto, who's a constitutional expert. Tim, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that Section 27 does?
Section 27 is an NGO, and what we do is we work in the area of social and economic rights. So the rights to education, the right to food, and the right to healthcare, for example. What we try and do is we try and combine research and advocacy, but also sometimes legal challenges, litigation, to realize the rights that the Constitution sets forward. The other thing that you mentioned, the Know Your Constitution campaign, which Section 27 is a part of, is a campaign to try and increase knowledge and understanding of constitutional rights throughout South Africa.
Okay, I'm going to bring you in, Henry. Can you tell us the state of South Africa's constitution 20 years into democracy?
Well, firstly, we're very concerned about the adherence to the constitution by, in particular, government and many other government entities. We include thereby certain of the non-adherence to some of the recommendations and findings of Chapter 9 institutions, and are therefore concerned that instead of adhering strictly to the Constitution and enforcing the spirit and intent of the Constitution, we have sometimes a drift away from those particular implications of the Constitution, as we have recently found with the Public Protector's report concerning Nkandla.
Okay, I want to touch on the Public Protector's report. As far as I could see, she said that she believed that the president was bona fide when he said he did not know about the thing. So effectively, she cleared him. Yet the DA is saying that the president should be removed, and you're going to try and make that happen. Is that perhaps not contradictory of the respect that people need to have for Chapter 9 institutions such as the Public Protector?
No, in fact, the opposite. What we found, upon a proper reading of that report, is that the president in certain instances refused to indicate what his position was concerning the bond he had apparently taken out in payment of certain of those buildings. There are certain other evidence which we have, which we are going to submit to the Speaker's office to indicate that the president has not been forthright. In fact, he has misled Parliament, and therefore the steps should be taken as we've indicated in our various press statements. But it is not true to say that he has been found not to have misled Parliament to the extent that he has not answered all those questions which were raised by the Public Protector, which he, on the face of it, willfully decided not to answer. So there are many other issues which need to be dealt with, including the Public Protector's report upon a proper reading, which he needs to account for.
Mm-hmm. Tim, I'm going to bring you in. There's been, because of the Nkandla report, there's been a lot of furor, there have been a lot of calls for the Public Protector's Office to be disbanded. Do you feel that there is an assault on Chapter 9 institutions in South Africa?
There is a bigger question about not an assault on Chapter 9 institutions, but perhaps about the strength of Chapter 9 institutions in South Africa. And the Constitution certainly contemplates those institutions being a force for the protection and promotion of human rights. And it's not just the Public Protector, it's also the Human Rights Commission. And often in our work we're confronted with issues which bring to the fore the issue that we could deal with much stronger, much more well-supported institutions like these. And when I speak of support, I'm talking about support financially from the government, where they have to be supported from, and also from civil society. And a greater awareness of these institutions from the public to use them for purposes. Because, for example, the Nkandla report, whatever the merits of it, it relies on people supporting the Public Protector's findings, on people taking those findings and holding those that she finds against or for accountable in coordination with the fact that she has found certain things.
I'm going to introduce Professor Shadrack Guto. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Now, Trevor Manuel says democracy is becoming threatened in South Africa, and we also hear in the narrative of Chapter 9 institutions position being Chapter 9 institutions perhaps being threatened in South Africa. Is this something that you're seeing?
I don't think that Chapter 9 institutions are being under serious threat. There have been quite a number of people speaking, particularly given the Public Protector's report on the Nkandla saga. And, but these institutions, particularly the Public Protector, I think Advocate Madonsela has done a sterling job really to be able to make that one of the pillars. Mind you, Chapter 9 talks about state institutions that support constitutional democracy. That's what they're there to do. And if one looks at particularly Section 181 of the Constitution, which covers all the Chapter 9 institutions, they're supposed to be independent and to do their work diligently, which is another very important section in the Constitution, Section 237. But then when you go to each one of them, Public Protector Section 182, it spells out what this institution has to do and to be able to make investigations, to be able to make findings, and also to look for remedies. And that's important, to be able to suggest what remedies ought to be there. And she deals with abuse of power, but also issues dealing with public administration, maladministration. And because of that, there's political pressure on that. Then we have the others, like the Human Rights Commission, Commission on Gender Equality, Commission on dealing with cultural, linguistic, and religious communities. Those are the human rights Chapter 9 institution. Then you have the Auditor General. The Auditor General is doing a pretty good job so far. So I believe that these institutions, what they need are courageous people who are professional, who understand that they stand on the Constitution and the legislation that govern each one of them. And if one stands by that, that's all you need to do your work, which the Constitution provides. Other people who are shouting at them and so on, they can shout. But shouting alone should not scare somebody who is carrying out a constitutional and legal mandate. You focus on your job because you have the powers to do your job.
Yeah. You've written in the Mail and Guardian about the change of the ANC from before until now. Do you think as the ruling party this then drifts down and affects institutions and our constitution as well?
Well, I think there have been a few statements made by leaders in the ruling party. One of them, which was very scaring, is where it was indicated that the ANC needs 2/3 majority in order to change the constitution. Then you had another statements made by the Youth League of the ANC saying that they want a law that would give immunity to the president and so on. Those are the worrying things going towards elections. But I believe that the citizens of the country, because this constitution was not just made by technical drafters, it is one where people's opinion, it went to the Constitutional Court, some provisions were found not to meet the threshold of the principles that were laid down, it had to be amended and so on. And from that point of view, people did participate, not everybody, of course, but it was not one which was not just given to people, it was a people-made constitution.
Now, Hendrik, I'm going to bring you in. There is this fear that if the ANC gets 2/3 majority, they will change the constitution. Now, constitution's been changed 17 times now. What's the problem?
The concern is that the Constitution should only be changed in two instances. One, for purpose of clarity, and secondly, to support and strengthen Chapter 9 institutions. Any institution that supports democracy, any institution that supports the Constitution. What you will see there is a substantive change to the spirit and the intent of the Constitution. If it isn't changed to the extent, as I understand, the ANC has indicated that it wants to change it.
Can you give us examples of those changes that the ANC want to make that are worrying?
Well, we're seeing more and more indications by the ANC where it has to do with property rights. And the property rights is being a sick clause in the Constitution being interpreted to such an extent where close to it, any asset or property being expropriated, there is a further constitutional measure called deprivation. Now, clearly there are certain quarters within the ANC we would like some form of expropriation without funding, without compensation, whilst you have expropriation with compensation, which is, of course, in certain instances, except by law of general application, which can be constitutional. But you have more and more indications by the ANC indicating that they want a bigger stake of the pie, the economic pie. You've seen it in the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Amendment Bill, which has been passed recently, where the government wants 20% of any new enterprise, with the entitlement, and the words are used, entitlement to a further 80% of that particular business structure's assets. So what you're seeing is instances where the government creates a position where it is can amend the constitution substantively, not for the purpose of strengthening democracy, not for the purpose of trying to obtain clarity, which those 17 other amendment bills were all about, or the acts as eventually passed.
Now, I'm going to put it to you that the ANC, the constitution was drawn together by many parties, but the ANC is the only party that has been in power since democracy, and none of these changes have taken place. So I'm just trying to understand why there's the sudden fear that one day people will wake up and...
But the concern is that the pressure has been starting to build in terms of pressure, political pressure on the ANC. It has clearly moved to the left. Its policies are clearly moving away from that which initially was GEAR. It has a national development plan to which, with due respect, having looked at the legislation that is amended quite recently in Parliament, it moves away. It is contradiction of that national development plan. So our concern is that they speak to the one side and they move to the other side. And those are our concerns. So why would a particular political party want to acquire a two-thirds majority to change the constitution in the first instance? And why do you spell it out in so much words? So the question should be phrased to them what it is that they want a two-thirds majority in order to change the constitution. They're unfortunately not here tonight, but
you know, we invite the ANC, but sometimes we get rejected, which happens in life. Tim, is this a fear that that Henrik is verbalizing? That's an actual fear, or is it politicking?
So from a Section 27 perspective, I mean, our organization is grounded firmly in the Constitution and in rights in the Bill of the Rights. So we would be very worried if the ANC was threatening to change rights in the Bill of Rights. From my own perspective, I think I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm not sure that I've seen any intention to change those rights. With respect, I don't know if I agree with Mr. Smith on his interpretation of our property clause in the first place. I think our Constitution has always sought to try and balance rights in our society, and our property clause is one example of where the type of delicate compromise that was struck, and I use the compromise advisedly because I think what it was a moderated view that was taken by the constitutional drafters, was taken into account very seriously. And what I think is a problem is that many South Africans don't understand the rights in the Bill of Rights, and so don't understand these balancing exercises, which leaves them exposed to any politician, whether that's in the ruling party, the opposition party, or any populist, for that matter, who might be outside of a political party, just saying that the Constitution might mean something or might mean something else. Now, from my position, I think that the people of South Africa should be helping us interpret the Constitution, that the people of South Africa should be helping explain how these balances are struck. And it shouldn't be for highbrow debates in academic journals, and it shouldn't be for political debates in Parliament only, because when we steal that language from people, we steal a certain power from them, and we prevent them from holding on to that Constitution.
Professor Guto, I'd also like you to weigh in on the discussion that we're having with regards to the ANC possibly changing the Constitution.
I think that that is political talk. The Constitution has been amended 17 times since it came into operation on the 4th of February 1977. And those changes were not drastic changes that really went into the foundation of the Constitution. And because of that, we haven't had an outcry. So if it is just a few tweaking around with the Constitution, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it begins to encroach on the fundamental of the Constitution, such as the values that, are built on it: multi-party democracy, human rights, human dignity, non-sexism, non-racism. And if it goes on to maybe to have like Section 3 of equality of citizens, citizens are equal and have equal rights and responsibilities, then you do have Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. Those would be very, very sensitive if one had wanted to really try to change them. So I don't think that the ANC would really dare, and for what reason would it be doing it when so far, particularly on the land issue, which I know is part of the a political hot potato as we go towards these elections. I think that what the ANC government has not been able to do sufficiently was to have a credible system where land for land reform, where it is to be bought or it is to be expropriated with compensation, is to read the Constitution clearly. The Constitution does not really provide for this so-called willing buyer, willing seller only.
We'll return to this discussion. I'd just like us to take a deeper look at the Constitution and where it's come from. Now, it's been hailed as one of the best constitutions in the world. February 1997, and the new Constitution of the Republic of South Africa was born. The Constitutional Court approved the Constitution on 4 December 1996, and it was signed by then-President Nelson Mandela in Sharpeville, Gauteng, on 10 December the same year.
21st of March 1960, Sharpeville in the then Transvaal. The South African apartheid police opened fire on a crowd, killing 69 people demonstrating against past laws. Since the 1920s, the movement of black South Africans had been restricted by past laws leading up to the Sharpeville massacre. The apartheid-supporting National Party government, led by Hendrik Verwoerd, used these laws to enforce greater segregation. Fast forward to 1990, Robben Island's most famous prisoner, Nelson Mandela, became a free man, but the resistance continued.
Nelson, you're not going to nationalize the assets of the white people. I have worked for my banks, my mines, my businesses, and my farms. You are not going to take it.
Nelson Mandela's vision for a free and democratic future had been clear from the early days, for Mandela was prepared to do all he could to fight for equality.
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
In 1994, South Africa dumped the apartheid system to hold its first democratic elections. And with this came a new freedom charter that guaranteed equality for all South Africans.
Never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
To date, South Africa's constitution is rated amongst the best charters in the whole world. The Rainbow Nation's constitution guarantees equality and many freedoms, meant to ensure the country does not return to the dark days of apartheid. Bureau reports, ANN 7.
A nation that draws strength from its diversity, courage from its resilience.
Now, before we took a look at the report on South Africa's constitution, we were discussing the possible changing of the constitution by the ANC. Henrik, you raised the point that the DA has a fear that that will happen, and both our guests disagree with you. I'd just like you to respond to that.
Yes, you know, it's very unfortunate that the ANC is not here, because they need to indicate to us why they want a two-thirds majority. Our concern is basically that there are certain indications by the ANC ruling party indicating a move to the left where it runs very close to nationalization runs very close to expropriation. I'm not saying that's what they've done. I'm saying it runs very close. It becomes an arguable matter. It's become an arguable matter in the Constitutional Court. There's a matter Agri-SA versus the Department of Mineral Resources, where the difference between expropriation, placing assets in the state custodianship, deprivation of property, all these possibilities are starting to come to the fore. And it is a concern where when you have, in the instance of the land restitution process being reopened, there are talks and there's sometimes discussions, there's sometimes articles in newspapers saying, and you have the certain political parties saying, we want justice and we want some form of redistribution of wealth. So there are certain factors and certain issues which need to be addressed, which need to be, the ANC needs to indicate what its stance is on certain of those issues. Because such as the mineral rights which were placed in the custodianship of the government, of the state, so the fear is that certain of the land may be placed in the custodianship of the state. Now, I'm not saying that is what's going to happen, but it is the role and the responsibility of the government to say we will or we won't deal with it in this particular fashion. We don't know. Anything is possible when they've got a two-thirds majority.
Now, one of the concerns that's been raised about your party, the Democratic Alliance, and it's enshrined in the Constitution, that we have to recognize the injustices of the past. And criticism of your party and your leader is that you do not do that sufficiently, and it's only started being done recently now, almost because of the backlash that you've received because of your comments on race, your representation of mostly white male members of parliament. Can you just respond to that?
Can I say, we unquestionably support redistribution of land. It is without discussion. What we do stand for is a proper managed process by a government that is able to implement a process and not to the detriment of those claimants. We have a reopening of a land distribution process because of the inability of the same government not to process those claims. I think there's something like, I talk on a correction, but something like 40,000 claims still not processed, if I talk on a correction, either 9,000, 40,000, not yet processed after the claims, the final date for submission was in 1998. It is impossible to then support the same government on the basis of the same procedure being repeated, where investor confidence in the way in which they intend to approach it will once again suffer. So it is the process, not the principle. It is a process and the conditions under which government wants to reintroduce land distribution, redistribution. So it's not the principle which we are in favor of course.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. SA Decides will be back and we'll continue discussing the Constitution and South Africa, 20 years in democracy. Do stay tuned.
You struggle to breathe. You can't climb a flight of stairs. Your body is wasting away, and many people fear you. I was diagnosed at a time when many thought this virus meant certain death. Hospice did not. Hospice cares for people with HIV. Through home-based palliative care, Hospice helps them live actively. I'm Justice Edwin Cameron. Hospice helps people like me enjoy good quality of life.
Hello and welcome to Sessions. But who's the real Black Coffee?
I'm a sister, I'm a lover.
I grew up milking cows. We sort of fell in love with music and rap.
I'm bringing this one to the people. I understand that you are just as good as your last hit.
I want us to do a fitness thing at least when I won.
Wait, like now?
Like now.
Go on the wind and light a fire in the ocean. Oh, yeah, you like rhyming stuff.
Catch Sessions every Friday at 9:30 p.m, Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 p.m.
I
am a child of the African soil.
I have many faces and many voices.
I am rural.
I am urban.
I am black.
I am white.
I am the Rainbow Nation.
I am educated.
I am a student.
I am independent. I am part of the global village.
I am positive.
I am uplifting.
I am power.
I am empowered.
I am proud.
I am South Africa.
I am the new age.
Which are the issues that affect you most? Has the nation's political class lived up to your expectations? Who is your favorite leader? Who is leading in the May 2014 sweepstakes? We bring you the answers in the biggest poll survey. Watch the result of the first ever poll covering every nook and corner of South Africa. SA Decides. Only on ANN 7. Tune in Thursday 8 p.m. DSTV channel 405.
Welcome back to SA Decides. I'm joined in studio by Tim Hodgson from Section 27, Henrik Smith from the DA, as well as Professor Shadrack Guter, who will be discussing the Constitution in detail. For now, we're going to take a look at what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. Our SA Decides team in KwaZulu-Natal have been asking residents how much they know about the country's Constitution. Although many are aware of the National Charter that guarantees full rights to all, some people feel their rights are not being upheld. Let's take a look.
Today we are in a show and we want to find out from people right here on the ground, what do they know about the Constitution, and if they really know what the Constitution really is. Come with us and we'll let you know. Hi. We just want to find out from you, do you know what the Constitution is?
Yes, I do.
Can you maybe explain to us what it means? Hi. We just want to find out from you, do you know what the Constitution is?
Yes, I do.
Can you maybe explain to us what it means? Sorry.
Well, I think the Constitution is obviously what the government deems by law as to our rights and how we as people are governed by the country.
There's not much I know about the Constitution. I just know it governs the law and rights of South Africans.
Sometimes our rights aren't taken seriously. They are usually taken for granted, especially in public facilities. For example, a public hospital. Nurses are very rude there.
I think the Constitution gives everyone their rights. No one should oppress the other. It also gives the right to education to our children and for them to be taken care of. It also gives the right to shelter.
Do you know what the Constitution is?
Yes, I do. In fact,
tell us.
It's the Constitution is the Bill of Rights, if I'm not mistaken, that has every right. Yes, it has every right of all the citizens of South Africa.
And do you think that politicians live up to the Constitution?
No, not all of them.
All right. And do you feel that your human rights are upheld?
No. Some politicians, they misuse the funds of South African people. They pay a lot of tax. Business people pay tax, and yet government people just misuse funds, and then they make promises that they can't keep.
Kuma indabeni ufuna ukwazi kuwe na ukuthi i-Constitution yayazi ukuthi yini? Ayisisekelo umthetho. There you go. one of the many people we've spoken to who do not want to speak to us or really don't understand what it is that we're asking them.
Tim, I'm going to bring you in. We spoke about the need to perhaps educate South African citizens more about the Constitution. How do you plan to do this with the campaign that you're involved in?
Okay, so let me start off with the representation that you've gotten here in these interviews is very representative of the country. There are many people who don't know about their rights. In a forthcoming survey of the Foundation for Human Rights, they found that only 46% of people had ever heard of either the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, and that only 10% of people in the country had either read or had read to them the Constitution. So I think it's a very common problem that we have. What should we do about it? There's many things that many government departments should be doing about it, and other Chapter 9 institutions, and also us as civil society. But some basic examples that the Know Your Constitution campaign is arguing for is adaptation of our curriculum in schools to make sure that human rights is manifested throughout and taught very well. Right now it's isolated to life orientation syllabus and a very specific portion of the life orientation syllabus. And then not enough time to be taught. And many teachers tell us in our work that they don't understand the Constitution themselves and therefore can't teach it. As a second thing, this book, the Constitution that we have, this tiny book which I've brought with me here, shouldn't be only a book for me to be able to read in a long, drawn-out, boring book. What it should be is it should fill the space all between us in society. It's not just between me and my government. It's between me and my wife. It's between me and my husband. It's between me and my boss. And there are rights that affect every single thing that goes on. Now, these rights need to be taught to people so that they can live with dignity, so that they can express themselves in ways that are in touch with the Constitution, and they can interpret the Constitution in ways that they want to. So the Human Rights Commission, for example, has a mandate to promote the Constitution. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development at least must ensure that people know what the Constitution is and can access it. Now, it's almost impossible to get your hands on this document in any language other than English. And in a country like ours, where most people's home language is not English, you have to start questioning whose responsibility it is, and why people don't know their rights in the Constitution, and why that statistic that I said to you earlier about only 10% of people ever having read the Constitution or had it read to them is true.
Professor Guto, are you in agreement with advocating for perhaps the Constitution being taught right from school level and in different languages?
First of all, let me just say that the Constitution, the small book, has been produced in other languages. It is only that people have not been mobilized to be able to read it. It is not only in English, but in other languages. So that is positive. The question is, can you read and understand it? Because it is written in legal language. And even people who have gone to school, who are not lawyers, cannot understand it. And even some lawyers do not understand it properly. So I think that when we talk about teaching children from creche onwards the language, the question is, what is the method of teaching? Do the people who are teaching understand it so that they are able to use a language that people really understand? But I think that the Constitution is more than the Bill of Rights. If you look at the clip, which was the interviews which were done in KZN, people immediately say, yeah, it is the law where our rights are and so on, which means that the people see the Constitution as only probably dealing with human rights issues. No, the Constitution is the foundation here. It defines the role and powers of the president and the limitation of those powers. It talks about what parliament is and what parliament can do and not do. It looks at the judiciary, it looks at prosecution authorities, the police, the army, and so on. So it is, and we have three spheres of government: national, provincial, local. Again, the Constitution does indicate which one has power and the limits of those powers, so that the national doesn't just encroach on the provinces willy-nilly. neither can the provinces do so at local level. So the Constitution is something that needs to be understood properly, and I think I would say start at the creche level so that children grow up knowing it, but also start it when, after elections, we are going to elections, the elected members of parliament need to understand the Constitution. The members of the cabinet who are going to be at the executive level also need to be taught about the Constitution. Some of the problems we are having today, we are having them with the law and breaking the laws and so on, have to do with people really not knowing what the limit of their power is or the extent of their power and how they have to use it. So the Constitution is important, and it needs to be really made known so that people possess that Constitution. Yeah.
We were discussing earlier on possible changing of the Constitution. As a constitutional law aspect, are there still areas in our Constitution that could be worked on to improve it?
I think yes, but changing the Constitution, I've already said in 20 years we have had 17 amendments. Now, that is too much for a Constitution. When people see that a Constitution can be changed, willy-nilly amended here and there, then they don't see this as a solid. Sometimes the interpretation can change over time, or people beginning to interpret certain provisions in a particular manner. You don't need to change the Constitution all the time, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. But at the same time, there are certain provisions in the Constitution which have not been given the life they should have. For example, we were talking earlier on about land issues. The Constitution provides very clearly that government should do all it can within the resources it has to ensure that citizens have access to land on an equitable basis. Nobody has touched that. Government has not done that, and so on. So all we are looking for is restitution of land where people were dispossessed from a particular moment up to another. We are not looking at, are we really making the Constitution a living document, both in letter, the spirit of it. I think that's where we need to focus. But I do not agree with any statement which tries to say the ANC is moving to the left. The ANC has moved so much to the right since 1994 that to try and say that, no, we see a movement towards the left, not within the ANC. Of course, there are other political parties that clearly say they are going to be on the left. South Africa's political spectrum is really set to the center, centrist. It is, but leaning more to the right and not the left.
We were speaking, Henrik, earlier on about the issue of land, which is a very important one in South Africa. And you were saying the DA believes in redistribution in a proper manner. I just wanted to find out from you, the DA, when the Land Act issue came up again, wanted to block people who hadn't applied in 1998. They wanted to have a cut-off time. Just wanted to find out why that was, and then also what the proper manner is of redistribution, according to the DA.
I'm not sure that we tried to block any person. I think what happened was there was about 9,000 or 40,000 claims, which has still not been dealt with. But we were in favor of opening up the redistribution process as a principle, and we said so right from the start. In fact, the first press statement that went out in this regard said we are, as a principle, in favor of it. So it's not, we didn't try to block. In fact, we tried to accumulate and try to facilitate. But the second issue is the way in which it should be done. It should be a notice period indicating, whether it's 12 or 18 months, indicating that this process will open for a limited period. We suggested a period of 6 months for people who then to make ready and to ensure that their claims are submitted, compiled, and that the necessary documentation is being completed, so that when the window period opens, they then submit their claims, have a 6-month period, it then closes, and it is then properly dealt with. The ANC said no, they wanted it basically immediately after the signing into power of that particular legislation, and then to run for a period of 5 years. And then the conclusion of that process would take probably another 15 to 20 years. Now, all we were saying is that impact on the investor confidence is extremely negative. If one were to open up a new land distribution process, which is close to being open-ended, and that was our concern. So we wanted to clear to everyone, widely distributed, widely made known, widely published, to everyone in the smallest little village, to indicate if you have a claim, do so. But you have a 6-month period, and this will be the time period, so that by the end of the 6-month period, everyone knows these are the claims against the following properties or land, and therefore anyone who would like to invest, because can do so. Banks, in fact, freeze many of the loan accounts of those farmers and or the owners of those properties when a land claim is registered. So it becomes a practical problem if you open this process for too long. It has a negative impact on the economy, and that is what our concern was.
And you speak a lot about investor confidence in South Africa. How important is it to balance the actual need of the citizens with what foreign people are thinking? I know that's a big concern with other parties. People are like, no, you can't do this because of investors. Surely if the citizens of South Africa are looked after, it shouldn't really matter what...
No. You look after the concerns of the citizens when you can. You have the financial resources to do so. The question is, how do you do it? Do you do it where we say you do the government way, or do you do it the DA way? We say that you should have an investor-focused market where the tax and the revenue and the growth of the economy which accompanies it, in fact, benefits and makes money available to ensure that you have a proper implementation of this program. The government balances it in a different way. We say in the wrong way, because you should look at this in a balanced way. How you strike that balance is the practical difference between, and sometimes a major difference, principal difference between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. And how you balance it is what we say the ANC government is doing wrong.
I was at a debate at Wits where there was Hodgson, the EFF, the DA and the ANC, and the issue of land came up. And Dr. Rampele was saying that we need to double our GDP in order to fulfill promises of land as espoused by the EFF. And like you were saying, that there is not enough money to make sure that we just take care of our citizens. And Advocate Dalimpofu just said, no, we'll nationalize everything and then we can pay. Is that not a solution?
But what will happen? There will be a freezing of any form of investment. There will be a form of disinvestment. There will be very little income in the form of taxes, royalties. The mining industry will basically, in my view, or our view, collapse. Many other industries will collapse. Who's going to invest in a country where you're going to invest and nationalize the banks? Who's going to invest in a country where
countries like Zimbabwe and China, which have bad human rights records or records of nationalization, are still having investors in them. So I'm asking, perhaps is it not time to take a more radical approach in order to solve problems like these in South Africa?
The radical approach is to move to a free market dominated economy. The ANC thinks the other way around. So that's where the ideological differences lie. But the issue is basically the way in which it is implemented. The way in which the DA is of the view that nationalization will kill the golden goose is not appreciated by the ANC. You cannot have any country competing with many of the Western or even African countries which have not nationalized. Many countries in Africa have not nationalized. And China, not that I'm the biggest knowledgeable individual on China, but China has a very competitive economy. And nationalization there is not practiced as we understand nationalization to happen. In fact, they may have a communist form of government, but the economic role model is basically a competitive economy, which is not based on nationalism.
Professor Guta, I could see you shaking your head furiously. Okay, both of you are shaking your head furiously, so I'm going to ask you to come in.
I didn't come here to debate with the DA. Let the ANC and the Economic Freedom Party and others debate. But there is, but as a citizen, and and somebody who is a scholar and in society, this idea of free market, it is an ideological formulation. There's no market which is free. The state, together with big capital, those who own the means of production, work together. And even in the US, when there was economic crisis in 2008, what did they do? We saw the arm of government coming in to stabilize the situation. The government did not say, let us leave it to the market to sort itself out. When colonialism occurred, the leaders in the imperial countries mandated their owners of capital to go abroad, and the government fought for them to acquire territory. So it was not just a question of something called the market. Ideologically, I find that very problematic. But as I said, I came to discuss the Constitution and not political ideology and so on. Let the politicians do that, and we see what happens on the 7th of May.
So I'm going to bring you in. Earlier on, you spoke about the need that the campaign has taken on to take the Constitution to people, and you were saying who's supposed to do that if government isn't doing that? At what point do people feel like institutions such as this interfere, perhaps, or are trying to maybe subvert what government is doing? Do you experience any of that?
There is certainly, there are elements, let me say, within all different governments which don't like civil society movements who argue very strongly on a principled basis. And the principled basis which a lot of civil society movements argue on in South Africa is the Constitution. So the interpretations that we give of the Constitution are sometimes contended by government agencies, and sometimes we receive a great deal of support from people within certain government departments too. The reason for that is obvious. If you disagree with government policy, or if you interpret it in a different way, it's inconvenient, it's difficult, it's challenging. But I think that just to tie together the two things that we're discussing now, it's important for people to understand the Constitution, to understand which debates it should be in. So fundamentally, the question about the economy is one that's also about the Constitution. So if you have a Constitution which says that the state must take reasonable measures to realize the right to housing, to realize the right to healthcare, to realize the right to education. It's a little bit of a silly debate to be having whether or not we have a free market system. We're socialists, we're Marxists, we're going to be China, or whether we have a free market system, so we're going to be America. Because the truth is that our Constitution places us somewhere in between right from the start. And if we understand our Constitution and we understand the responsibilities placed on the government in order to realize the Constitution, then maybe we get somewhere in the start of that debate. But secondly, our Constitution does something even more radical than that. Our Constitution says that the rights in the Bill of Rights don't only apply to the government, and that's typical of constitutions elsewhere in the world, for example, in America and European countries. It says that private parties, including ourselves as civil society, as NGOs, and businesses have responsibilities to realize the rights in the Constitution. The Constitution imagines a different future for us, a more equal future, and says that we must all participate in making that future. So how that can be left out of a discussion about the National Development Plan, which is our dream for 2030, that the government has set up, or any other imagined future, is something that's quite beyond me. And I would like to hear politicians from all sides and academics from all sides telling me why it is that their vision is the one that's in keeping with the Constitution, rather than telling us that the free market system is better or the communist system is better, because we've been having those debates for hundreds of years, and they're getting us nowhere except for in this academic, intellectual environment, which is not really of any practical use to us moving forward as South Africans.
Henrik?
Well, to us, the Constitution is basically the primary document relating to values and the principles which underpin the modern democratic society. And what is very important is it's not only the letter and intent of the Constitution, but also the spirit of the Constitution that is of utmost concern and importance. And when you have a public institution, a Chapter 9 institution, making recommendations, the spirit of the Constitution, the whole notion of the document that was accepted universally within our country was that those recommendations need to be acted upon. So it is not just the formalistic compliance to the Constitution that will carry us through, but also the adherence to the Constitution in both the substantive as well as the spirit of the Constitution. And that is, when you have to explain something, when you have to be held accountable, you do so, because that's the spirit of the Constitution. And when you asked by any of those Chapter 9 institutions to explain yourself, to adhere to the recommendations or the decisions thereof, then you do so unequivocally and in so fast possible way you can. Now that is the spirit of the Constitution as we all understand it. And if you do not adhere to those recommendations, it takes away, it detracts from the Constitution. And if the most, well, let's put it, the most important person in the Republic does not adhere to the recommendations of that public protector, what do we then expect of those individuals who should we expect to also adhere to those recommendations?
Should we not wait for that particular individual to respond? I think it's going to be like by tomorrow evening before we pronounce on whether they're not following the recommendations.
Well, if you listen to what certain senior individuals in the ANC have said, and said basically we are not holding, to the effect that we're not holding number one to account, we will leave it to him to deal with. But if that's the level of accountability, then we have a concern, because the spirit of the Constitution expects accountability from all individuals.
Professor Guto, I'm going to ask you if we need to be concerned as South Africans that if people at the top don't follow, is it correct that people at the top don't follow the recommendations of the Constitution? And do we have to be concerned as South African citizens?
Well, we should be more than concerned, but at this stage, which person or institution has not implemented a recommendation by a Chapter 9 institution? We are waiting tomorrow. We will judge the president tomorrow whether he has presented the report to Parliament as required by the law, and also his response to what has been recommended by the public protector. Let's wait to be able to see that. But indeed, some of Chapter 9 institutions like the Independent Electoral Commission, they have done a good job in the past, and I think they are going to continue to do that.
Tim, very briefly, do we need to be worried going forward about our Constitution in South Africa?
I think that we have a lot to be happy about our Constitution in South Africa. I think that we've come out, as we're saying, with a very liberal Constitution, with a Constitution which does a lot for people. It doesn't look like there's any major threat to the Constitution directly, as we've discussed already. But what we need to be worried about is only the fact that people are not taking it up. Because the Constitution eventually and ultimately over the next 100 years will depend on the buy-in that people give to it and the interpretation that people give to it in South Africa. So if we believe in the achievement of equality as a value, if we believe in dignity as a value, then I think that as a society we're not going to have as much of a problem going forward. And we also do need public officials who respect this too.
Thank you very much to our guests who came in and spoke to us about the Constitution. Thank you to you for watching SA Decides. If you'd like to take part in the conversation, you can tweet us at SA Decides or using the hashtag SA Decides. It's time for a short break. When we return, ANN 7 Prime with Peter Stemmet. Good evening.